Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Jonathan Hollerman. I'm the Deputy Director at the EMP Task Force, and today we've got a great interview with David Pyne. He is the Executive Director at the Task Force as well. He's a national security strategist, and he's the editor of the Real War newsletter. Sorry, David. Nice to have you on.
Great to be on with you, Jonathan.
So yeah, I wanted to have you on. There's some big stuff happening in the news, some current events that we should talk about, and let's just go ahead and dig right in. Let's discuss this attack that was in Moscow. So just for background, I have always been saying since the Ukrainian war started, since the first month of the Ukrainian war, I have always been telling my followers on Patreon and the people that follow my newsletter, hey, I'm not as concerned what's happening inside Ukraine. I am primarily focused on what's happening in Russia. If there are major attacks, infrastructure attacks inside Russia that escalate, if Ukraine takes the war from inside Ukraine to Russia specifically, and we've seen that escalating more lately. They've been hitting different facilities in Russia, and I think some of the weapons they use, the medium range weapons, were U.S. supplied weapons. My stance has always been if the war ends up on the motherland in Russia, they're going to blame us, and they could absolutely escalate. So with that in mind, let's discuss what just recently broke. If you want to share with the viewers here the latest news from the last 24 hours.
Yeah, so there was a huge terrorist attack that impacted a Moscow concert hall in which 133 Russian civilians were killed. Russia's never seen a mass terror attack on this scale, I think, ever. ISIS has claimed responsibility. I think ISIS-K is claimed responsibility for the attack. But just breaking news, Russia is alleging, likely correctly, Ukrainian ties for the ISIS terrorists. They're saying that the ISIS terrorists, were driving in a car with Ukrainian license plates, that they were based out of Ukraine. They were trying to flee across the Russo-Ukrainian border back to, I guess, the Ukrainian support base. And this is, I think that's the most likely possibility. My first thought, to be honest, was that it could have been a Russian false flag event. But when I saw ISIS claim responsibility, the chances of this being a Russian false flag event, decreased to near zero. So I think we have to assume that in this case, at least, the Russian narrative is likely correct, and this is going to be used as a pretext for Putin to massively escalate the war in Ukraine. And we saw that. I actually read, before I heard of the terror attack, I heard the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, state that the Russian special military operation in Ukraine had ended, and that this was officially now considered a war with NATO, a proxy war with NATO in Ukraine. And there's, a lot of, the lay public, American citizens don't really understand what this means. A special military operation is essentially saying that Russia was fighting a kind of a Vietnam-style conflict with velvet gloves. That, for example, Zelensky, government buildings in Kyiv would not be targeted. Russia wouldn't engage in any additional major offensives. They just try to hold what they have. They wouldn't escalate beyond Ukraine's borders to NATO member states that are actively arming and supporting, training, even in some cases, maybe even pulling the trigger, with the case of the British, firing drone attacks against Russia, perhaps the U.S. as well. And now the velvet gloves are likely to come off, and that means, as Dr. Peter Price stated, Russia was actually trained to fight unconventional warfare against NATO forces. And what that means is, we could see counter space attacks that could take out every single U.S. and NATO satellite that's been supporting or feeding intelligence to Ukraine. We could see greatly escalated cyber attacks against the U.S. and its NATO allies and Ukraine itself, most likely. and other escalations. And this I recently wrote an article about how this NATO warnings of World War III with Russia were stood a likely chance of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the more we attack, everything is painted through the lens of kind of Ukrainian and Biden regime propaganda. Where Russia is an unprovoked aggressor. We know that's not the case. They are the aggressor, and they committed a war crime in terms of actually engaging in a invasion of a neighboring country. But that's where the truthful narrative ends. This was provoked massively by U.S. leaders and NATO in terms of inviting Ukraine to join NATO in 2008. There were three different joint NATO exercises with Ukraine in 2021 alone. And then, of course, the Strategic Partnership Agreement, which was signed between Ukraine and Russia. But most importantly, as you noted, the attacks inside Russia itself, which have recently turned out to be CIA directed, essentially.
Yeah, David, this has been a frustrating time period for me. I've actually, with my newsletter, my followers, I've pulled back a little bit from even covering current events because the information that comes out immediately after anything ends up not being true in almost every case at this point. We see political narratives, just this whole Ukrainian war thing. I'm watching CNN give explanations on, that it's completely unprovoked. There's, Putin's just this insane man that just singing "Hoo-yah" and like attacking Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. And then you get a different narrative from Fox News, and then you go onto the internet, some maybe what I would consider some more reliable sources, and you get another narrative, and then you go on places like Twitter, or if you're looking at specific on the ground reporting, whether it's actual video. The first one was that attack on the hospital, right? Again, this would have been, I'm sorry, this would have been Israel and Gaza, but where they targeted a hospital and blew a hospital up, and then you saw, and like 500 people were dead, and then when the video from the ground comes out from the site, it's like a little tiny bomb in the parking lot, right? And there's a handful of people, and then you find out it was their own missile, right? So we're seeing this with like all these conflicts, and it's really hard to know what to believe. But I would say probably the biggest narrative going back to Ukraine and Russia is that this was completely unprovoked. I mean, Putin's just this crazy guy, and he just wanted to, he wanted to ride in there on a white horse and take over Ukraine. So can you shortly push back on that and, kind of give people a little bit of a short history lesson as to how this thing even kicked off and why we got where we're at with this?
Well, the immediate trigger, or rather, I guess the original trigger was, of course, Biden's authorization for the February 2014 Maidan coup. There was a book written called War in Ukraine. It was actually written by liberal Democrats, who happen to believe that Biden's manufactured war in Ukraine is a huge mistake. It's a humanitarian disaster for Ukraine, but also bring us closer to an unnecessary nuclear war with the Russian Federation, which is the mightiest nuclear superpower on the planet. So that essentially caused Putin to invade Crimea and also to support Russian separatists in the Donbass region. The very leader that Victoria Nuland, then serving as Assistant Secretary of State, handpicked, that was Biden authorized to be the next Prime Minister of Ukraine, was actually picked. Essentially he was a puppet. We can't say with certainty that Zelensky's a puppet, but at least that leader was a puppet because he was handpicked by us. That kind of Putin had already been feeling less secure with Bush's regime change operations, with the Orange Revolution in 2004 in Ukraine, and then with Georgia as well the prior year. But all that led up to the construction of CIA bases, 12 CIA bases that we're aware of in Ukraine. Of course, we have the biolabs, and I don't think the biolabs are a big issue. There are 24 biolabs that were confirmed by the U.S. Producing biological weapons that could potentially be used by Ukrainians against Russia. And Russia essentially, Putin massed his forces following in March 2021 when Zelensky said in no uncertain terms that he would retake Crimea if by military means if necessary. And that led up to the December crisis, where Russian troops again massed their troops on Ukraine. And on December 7th, 2021, Putin said, "If you just issue us a written guarantee, Ukraine will never become a formal member of NATO. We'll withdraw our troops back to bases." And Biden's told Russia to go pound sand. Then Russia came up with a mutual security treaty, and Biden rejected that as well on January 25th, 2022. And of course. That I predicted that that would just guarantee a Russian invasion of Ukraine that happened on the 24th of February, and 5 weeks later, Russia and Ukraine had negotiated a peace agreement to end the war completely, in what I would call a Ukrainian victory, in which Russia offered to withdraw its troops from 6 of its 8 Ukrainian occupied oblasts, excluding Crimea, But when Russia actually began implementing that agreement, withdrew from the 3 northern oblasts, the U.S. did an about face. Biden, who had been supporting peace efforts, through mid-March, according to, a retired lieutenant general on Fox News, decided that this was the time to, this was by Putin showing weakness by making this unilateral withdrawal that, he didn't have to do. This wasn't a Ukrainian military victory. It was a decision on the part of the Kremlin to show that it was serious about peace with Ukraine. The whole purpose of the Russian invasion of Ukraine was, yes, it was to prevent the Ukrainian invasion of the Donbass People's Republics that were Kremlin backed, but it's primarily to prevent Ukraine from becoming essentially to reverse its de facto NATO membership status, in which the U.S. had really been successful in expanding, de facto expanding NATO and its sphere of influence and liberal empire into Ukraine.
Yeah, and we've seen since this kicked off. I mean, I don't remember which European leader was talking about now we have to fast track Ukraine into NATO. I mean, there were reasons why we weren't letting Ukraine into NATO. They were considered one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and now they're the. I remember seeing Vice and New York Times articles on like a couple of years ago, not long after the coup there in 2014. I remember seeing articles on these Nazi-backed battalions and stuff like that. And again, I don't trust Vice and New York Times and some of these left-wing outlets very much, but they were reporting on it, and then those articles disappeared. And now they're all pretending like this was never a thing, and that Ukraine's like this wonderful country, and they're totally to be trusted. We're seeing Macron the other day talking about putting troops in Ukraine, and I think it's just gamesmanship and it's rhetoric and ramping things up. But at the end of the day, I think Putin came back pretty strongly and said, if you start putting troops in Ukraine, it's kind of game time, right? So, and again, that's another narrative that's just, from my understanding, from what I've read, it's just not true that Putin has no designs on the rest of Europe. This isn't a Hitler-esque, expanding an empire type thing. He had reasons for going into Ukraine. Not saying he should have done it, unjustified. But at the end of the day, that's the narrative that you hear all the time. Oh my goodness, if we don't win here, he's going to move, and he's going to come into Europe, and he's going to go after France and Poland and all these other countries. And it's outright propaganda, in my opinion. A lot of the cases and in some of the news. I mean, they just push a narrative because all of a sudden we're on Ukraine's side. We're funding them. In my opinion, I believe we're essentially fighting a proxy war with Russia, and we're using Ukrainian children to do it. We're using Ukrainian bodies to fight a proxy war with Russia. The West is, right, and I think it's going to backfire. I think if at some point, if cooler heads don't prevail, if somebody doesn't pull back from this, it's just going to keep escalating. And so you mentioned how Russia has now declared war on Ukraine. Where do you see this going forward?
For the first time, I see a very real risk of. Looks like you might have been muted. For the first time, I see a very real risk of World War III with Russia, and by World War III, I mean a direct war between Russia and NATO. Initially I thought maybe Macron's statements were, more posturing, strategic posturing to try to show solidarity with Ukraine. But the more I've read into them and UK proclamations, and Poland, of course, that sent up to 20,000 volunteers to fight Russia directly in Ukraine, um, maybe more like 12,000 actually. Um, it seems actually likely that we're going to see a massive Russian offensive, likely in the summer, that will materialize in the next 2 to 3 months, likely from the Kharkiv region. As I've been predicting the last 2 years, that could cut off all of Ukrainian forces in southeast Ukraine by driving all the way to the Dnipro River line and then heading south, rolling up, that entire stretch of territory for Russia. And that would likely, I think, most likely will cause. And I've been dismissing this for many, many months. Dr. John Mearsheimer has been warning about this, and now I am as well. That could cause Britain, France, and Poland, and perhaps even some Baltic states to send, kind of an ad hoc NATO expeditionary force, because NATO, of course, doesn't have, with 32 members, every single one of them would have to unanimously declare war on Russia to authorize, this type of operation. So it would be essentially a coalition of the willing, much as we did during the second Iraq war with kind of the U.S. and Britain, really. Just a few NATO countries sending tens of thousands of troops. And the purpose of this expeditionary force would be to defend the Dnipro River line. So it would be to defend Kyiv, defend central and western Ukraine from Russia, as well as the Belarus direction, so that Russia couldn't pounce on Kyiv from the north, which is, I think, Kyiv is
Has
only 60
hasn't
miles away.
hasn't real quick, hasn't Putin always said that's a red line for him for NATO forces to be in Ukraine?
He has, yeah. He stated that's a nuclear red line. Now, I
Yeah.
don't think that. I do think it's a nuclear red line, but I don't think that Putin has shown tremendous strategic forbearance, and I don't want to encourage NATO leaders to do this, but I don't think that Putin would react immediately with nuclear forces. I think he would go right up the escalation spiral. So as soon as NATO combat forces cross the Ukrainian border in force, we'd see a massive counter space attack. And if that failed to deter, cause them to retreat, then we could see massive cyber attacks, and that could be not limited to NATO forces in the region. It could be NATO wide. It could be U.S. wide, North America. Because on any at any given time, Putin could use either super EMP weapons, as we've been alerting the American people about, or cyber weapons to essentially collapse the United States and to prevent us from being able, not only preventing us from being able to surge additional military forces to theater, but also to essentially cause our government to collapse and tens of millions of Americans to starve to death. So, we're playing with nuclear fire. We're playing with EMP fire. That's a term that Peter Pry used before his untimely death. And we're playing with cyber fire as well. And any one of those three weapons could see the end of Western civilization.
Yeah, I like the descriptor you used earlier, kind of in the sense that Russia's kind of fighting a Vietnam war, in the sense that they've had these white gloves on, and they have the technology and they have the ability to do much more to Ukraine than what they're doing. They have, I would agree, Putin has shown great restraint in the face of certain things happening in his country. We did see his retaliatory strike strike here 3 days ago where he started attacking the Ukrainian electric grid again and started bombing their electric grid. That's something he could have been doing the whole time. It takes a long time to replace a high voltage transformer in a country like that. And so, I mean, there are that's always been the concern is, are we going to allow this to escalate, right? How do we prevent it from escalating? The war of words, giving more weapons, inviting Ukraine into NATO, or saying we're going to fast track that, when that's the one thing Putin didn't want them to do in the first place, right? All
Right.
these things are like literally poking the bear in the eye. We're just, and that's my, because we just keep poking and poking and poking and prodding and poking. At some point, that bear is going to take a swipe back. And like you said, I don't believe that he's going to all of a sudden start using tactical nukes either. But I think cyber could definitely ramp up. I think you could see different systems. I don't know that he's going to go the full nuclear option and take out electric grid to be a cyber, but he may take regions down. You may start seeing water facilities or sewage facilities or other critical infrastructure outside of the electric grid. I think he would probably start there. We were warned about this before he entered Ukraine. There was one of his close advisors, I can't remember her name, was on national TV saying that she expected this war to basically escalate this way. I think she probably expected it sooner, but these things would happen, and then we would poke and they would poke, and it would just escalate. And she actually came out and said, and then once it gets so far, they're going to take the electric grid out in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., and then we're going to black out in Moscow. And she said, then we're going to hit them with an EMP and take out their entire electric grid. That was her take before this even kicked off. So these are concepts and theories. As the EMP task force, we are constantly getting information on this. We're constantly discussing it, but the American people don't understand the risk of a large region or the entire country losing the electric grid. So again, so we're going to see this again. We got to wait and see how it plays out, and we're going to hope that somebody in the current administration has the wisdom to kind of try and put the brakes on this whole thing and slow it down. It just seems like we just keep, like, Russia has this red line and we just keep sticking our toe over it a little bit further, and he moves the red line back a little bit and we stick our toe over. I hope he keeps doing that. But this latest attack in Moscow that we talked to at the beginning of the interview here, I forget how many dead, but it was a pretty gnarly attack.
133 so far.
What's that?
133 so far.
Oh wow! I haven't checked the news this morning. I didn't know it was that high, but that's a lot. That's a lot. And I know ISIS took credit for it, but some of the video evidence and some of the stuff that the Russians are putting out does raise some questions on that as to where these guys actually came from and who actually paid them to do this. So, yeah, typically ISIS use ISIS guys to do their attacks. They use in-house terrorists that they get into a country to do their tasks. These guys sound like they were hired. They were given 500,000 rubles. They were given AK-47s. They were given the stuff to carry it out. So that's that. Who knows? We're gonna find out. But either way, it doesn't spell good news for Ukraine, Russia. So I'd like to pivot here real quick and and discuss the current events with China and Taiwan and where that currently sits, that scenario. I know over the Super Bowl break there was a big cyber intrusion. It's been there for a long time. They finally found it. It's called Volt Typhoon. The Chinese had embedded into a lot of our different infrastructure, especially our electric grid energy infrastructure. We're seeing massive amounts of we're seeing large amounts of high voltage transformers coming from a company, JSHP, out of China, which we know are putting backdoors in their transformers. The Trump administration put a stop to that with an executive order, and that executive order was overturned when Biden came into office, and now this same company is putting those transformers in. I've seen two recent articles on the batteries that we're purchasing from China to put in our large solar arrays in the electric grid. We're seeing Joe Weiss. He's been reporting for a decade on the SCADA equipment and how a lot of that stuff's coming from China. It seems like they're all throughout our grid at this point. So feel free to jump in here, David. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on where this China Taiwan situation is headed?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's we now have at least 466 large Chinese transformers in the grid, and these are transformers that weigh 250 pounds or more. So these are extremely difficult to replace. They're almost the displacement of a U.S. Gunboat, patrol gunboat that's used to train Navy SEALs that weigh about 280 tons, and we have 3% in reserve. So I haven't done the math to find out what percentage of our transformers overall are Chinese built, but I think it's about 9 to 10, maybe 11%. And of course, we had the 60 Minutes interview, I think, with Mike Mabey and some other, grid experts, in which it was stated that, even as few as 9 out of 55,000 uh, uh, what do they call them, substations, if they were taken out, it could take our grid down for up to 3 weeks. Just imagine if China sent a satellite signal and turned off 400 10 or 11% of our large transformers.
Yep.
It would take out the grid really likely for good, unless we could, unless and until we could get the large transformers to replace them, or bypass them. And that would be before any Chinese cyber attacks. So, we go to war with China, it's going to be, a lot the same as if we go direct war with Russia. But it's probably going to happen even faster in terms of the escalation spiral. The counter space and the cyber would probably be day one, certainly within the first 3 days of a direct war with China. Because really, the side that strikes first has the advantage, whether it's a nuclear first strike, EMP. Of course, we don't have super EMP weapons, and cyber as well, and counter space weapons. We reportedly have a top secret counter space network that's a satellite system that's very effective. But if Russia or China take them out first, that our ability to use those weapons to take out enemy satellites will be severely degraded. And that would apply to cyber attacks as well. The director of the FBI recently gave some open source testimony on how bad the Chinese cyber threat is, and he said if every single FBI agent that's in the field were singularly purposed to oppose Chinese, try to counter Chinese cyber attacks, they'd still be outmanned by 50 to 1. So, China it reportedly had a Chinese hacker army of at least 60,000 troops. I suspect that number may be as high as 90 or 100,000 today. They are, and even with all that, they're still second. They're not even the greatest cyber threat in terms of cyber capabilities. Russia has been assessed as having the best cyber offensive capabilities in the world by U.S. intelligence. So, China's trying to catch up to Russia, but essentially they're kind of at the same level. And the U.S., we have decent, cyber offensive capabilities, but we're far, far more vulnerable to cyber attacks than Russia and China are. Our cyber defensive capabilities are really, Biden's been doing some good work on that, but we're still way behind the power curve. Of course, they're doing nothing at all to defend the U.S. against nuclear missile attack or super EMP attack. So these are huge vulnerabilities. Basically, China has ticking, cyber time bombs in our military networks, cyber networks, that they would activate in the event that Biden made good on his pledge to defend Taiwan militarily. And as I wrote in my article about the likely October surprise timeframe for China to blockade Taiwan, this is likely to materialize in the next 7 months or so. Essentially, I've been warning for several years, since at least 2020, that Xi Jinping has set a date for reunification for Taiwan, not 2049 or even 2027 has been misreported, but likely by 2025. And the the Biden presidency essentially is kind of represents a window of vulnerability that I don't think that Xi Jinping can withstand the temptation to utilize to attain a reunification, before potential Trump victory in November. So the time frame is pretty clear. It's been clear for a while. I was contacted by email by someone I believe to be a Chinese intelligence agent, and in response to one of my articles, the national interest, and I responded by saying, "Hey, I think if you represent the Chinese government, I think you should lay out a clear timeline that that China's gonna not take no for an answer and reunify by the end of 2024, by December 31st, 2024." And he went silent after that. It's as if I knew his time, China's timeline, and I can't vouch for that, but I thought it was pretty telling that he didn't respond to that at all. But I think that's it, and we've the incoming commanding admiral of Indo-PACOM, I think it's Admiral Paparo, has stated that China is frighteningly close to being able to to move from a military drill to a full-scale invasion of Taiwan, or a major offensive against Taiwan from a standing start with no strategic warning. So this is not a threat that's I watch Taiwan seminars, China seminars, at least 2 a week, it seems lately. And they're all saying, oh, it's not till 2027. We still have a few years. We can arm Taiwan. We can do all these defensive measures. We can upscale our naval forces in the region. And we just don't have the time, and so when you're outmatched as the U.S. currently is by the Sino-Russian military alliance, nuclear, we're probably outmatched 5-1 in currently in operational strategic nuclear warheads. Tactically, it's 35-1 against Russia. They have 35 times more tactical nuclear weapons than we do. The U.S. has no tactical nuclear weapons in theater in the Pacific. We're completely massively overmatched by China. And in that field, they have at least hundreds of non-strategic nuclear weapons they could use in the Far East and the Western Pacific. We have to pursue a diplomatic solution. And so I actually came out with a diplomatic solution in which I said that not only can and should the U.S. Declare strategic clarity with regards to Taiwan, not as the neocons seek to do by saying we'll defend Taiwan no matter what, or Biden has done, but rather the opposite, by saying that the U.S. will not defend Taiwan militarily. Then we can ensure that China has no reason to attack us. And this isn't it wouldn't be a sign of weakness. It would, we could, at the same time we said that, we could say we're gonna step up the economic war against China. We're gonna double or triple the size of our nuclear arsenal. We're going to go to DEFCON 3 on a permanent basis until the Taiwan and Ukraine crises are eliminated. Or I would argue completely revamp the DEFCON system to take out DEFCON 4 and 5 entirely. So we're always on 24-hour alert in terms of, bomber strip alert, never having the president and vice president in the same city at the same time. Just to take that off the table, or, currently they could engage in a nuclear decapitation strike that could take out all 3 nuclear footballs and render a new president, sworn in, like Speaker Johnson, for example, unable to launch a nuclear retaliatory strike for days. So they could destroy our nuclear arsenal at their leisure over a 3-day period. So, the U.S. has never been this vulnerable. They could use our enemies could use super EMP to take us out in a matter of minutes with little to no warning, perhaps no warning at all with the super EMP satellite. And there's nothing we can do about it.
So your specialty is geopolitical, nation state type. And you don't have to answer this. You can tell me it's just not something you want to answer. But I'm also curious because a lot of the chatter is election related, right? I mean, I'm getting a lot of chatter. People asking me, what do you think is going to happen at election time? What do you think is going to happen at election time? And I don't have any special insight. Is that something that you've looked at? Because who was it? Ron Paul the other day was talking about a false flag, and we've had like 4 or 5 people, someone from even the Biden administration, talking about a false flag. But who's false flag from which side, right? So I don't know. There's a lot of people that are predicting a lot of craziness happening around the November election season. Either way, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's undeniable that there was, massive Democrat fraud. I won't go so far as to say they stole the election, although I think they likely did. That the fraud was on that scale, but certainly millions of votes. I would say 6 million votes were stolen. Between illegal voters, smartomatic algorithms. I mean, vote tallies going in real time. There was a CNN video in which Trump's numbers voting tally went down 100,000 and Biden's went up 100,000 in real time. That was pretty crazy, and we saw all kinds of things like that. And there's been videos 2,000 mules and whatnot. But without a doubt, the Democrats are, they behave like political communists. They're trying to, make it so that trying to prevent Trump from even running, really, throw him in prison for life, and that's not something you see um, in a free country, really. It's more of a banana republic, and that's really a sad, commentary on what used to be the least corrupt and most free country in the Western Hemisphere. Now I think we're one of the most corrupt in the world. But we need to turn this situation around, and that starts with electing new leaders. And I'm not going to endorse any president, on the show, of course. But we need new leadership, and we need leadership from either party. It could be either party, that are committed to defending America, defending, and really jettisoning this suicidal strategy in which we're trying to start nuclear wars with Russia and China simultaneously. And it wouldn't just be Russia and China; it would be North Korea and Iran as well. And I've been worried about this for in the national interest and on my Real War Substack for I think over 3 years now. But I do. I don't. I think that there is a chance that Biden could use, for example, a Chinese or Russian cyber attack just before the election that was pretty major, and perhaps even war with China to cancel the elections, to indefinitely
Right.
postpone the elections, and essentially, in all but name, make himself a de facto dictator, as Volodymyr Zelensky did in Ukraine.
I
And
was going to say Zelensky. We talk about importing democracy, and Zelensky hasn't allowed elections to happen since this
yeah,
thing broke out, right?
right.
So
Yeah, there's been no democracy to defend in Ukraine since March 2022, when Zelensky started assassinating his political leaders. He abolished 11 opposition political parties and forced all opposition TV networks to broadcast Ukrainian government propaganda 24/7. I mean, that just imagine if Trump had thrown Obama and Hillary in prison, and Biden and forced MSNBC and CNN to broadcast Fox News, continuously. So yeah, there's a tremendous information war, a disinformation campaign that's going on from U.S. intelligence and the Biden administration, and in pursuit, in support of this America Last agenda that's getting us into unnecessary potential world wars with multiple nuclear adversaries at the same time.
it's funny how for so many years, the Republicans were the war hawks, right? They were the ones starting all the wars, and the left wing Democrats were the ones like anti-war, anti. We don't, and it's like flipped on its head now. Like the left is pushing us into all these wars, and yeah, let's go to war. Yeah,
Yeah,
let's do it.
they love war.
And it's like what happened? Like there's money and power and things behind the scenes, and who knows, but and you're right about you're right about the previous election. The problem is we live in a world, and with AI the way it's heading, and algorithms and social media and people not listening to the mainstream news outlets because they're just completely bought and sold by one of the two parties at this point, right? And so people are getting their news from other sources. And so I just literally saw a video yesterday about a guy that was doing a presentation in front of I don't know if it was a county council or something like that, and he was showing them that he had the ability to get right into the election software, and he was showing that the password was like election won, and he was like, this is insane. Like, this is so easy. And so I have not seen evidence that proves that the election was stolen, but they stopped all the investigations, right? Like, I don't know that we'll ever know. I just personally have a very hard time believing that Joe Biden got more American votes than Barack Obama. Like, that he was the most popular president of all time in our history, got the highest percentage of votes. I just have a hard time believing that. So I'm not an election denier either. I don't have any evidence otherwise, but it's problematic in the sense that that's what I was getting to with all that was the fact that there are depending on where you travel, there's a lot of videos on non-mainstream channels that make a pretty compelling case about what happened in 2020. And we've got this election coming up here in November, and there's a lot of questions where is this going to happen again? It was like the first time in history we saw the guy win on national TV at the voting booth, and then we start counting votes, all these prepackaged mail-in votes, and they're finding, oh, here's another duffel bag of votes, and we're going to count these ones now, and then we see the election completely turn from mail-in voting, and I'm not saying, again, I'm not making a case one way or the other. I'm just saying people are concerned. People are legitimately, I believe, legitimately concerned about the integrity of our elections, right? And maybe they don't narrate it the best way they should. You've got that, I forget, Tyler Green on the office floor. Maybe she's not as, precise with her words. Maybe Trump's not as precise with his words in certain of these things and how he puts it out there. But the American people are concerned. And that's and I think the left doesn't see this kind of brewing in the background, right? This brewing in the background. If I personally see, if Biden gets elected, I think for the first time in history, you're going to see right-wing riots in the streets, right? I think if we see Trump get elected, you will see like the left-wing agitators, Portland, Seattle. They're probably going to take over another city block and police station for another month or two. You're going to see this happening on the other side, and it all comes down to my point in all this, David, is it's all coming down to you don't know what to believe anymore. Your eyes, ears can lie to you. Whatever source of information, I rarely say on my show, we're living in a post-truth world. You don't even know what to believe anymore. And so because of that, because there's no integrity in the media on any side, because there's no integrity in DC, they're just spending like drunken sailors, like this new omnibus that came. It's just nobody's even reading bills. They haven't been doing it for a decade. We're entering in a space where the American people have been painted by race, by creed, by political affiliation, by religion. We're all being painted into these corners, and I just see it going south at some point. I'm very concerned with the direction of our country, and I don't know how much further. You watch the different media outlets from the different sides, and it's no longer like, man, we disagree on this policy and they're wrong, or even calling them a name or something. Now it's like they're an enemy. They're an enemy of the state. They're a traitor, and they need to be. I have a close personal friend. Well, I won't go down that road, but like you can't even communicate with them on a logical level. And the kind of the hate is so extreme because they watch CNN and MSNBC every day. It's like, well, let's just have a regular conversation about policy and stuff. They can't do it. It's just. So what are your thoughts on that, just as far as social upheaval coming in the future? That was where I was kind of heading with this November thing.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the Biden State of the Union was, essentially it was a declaration of war on 74 million or 100 million Trump supporters, half the country, half the voting electorate, in which he painted them as Nazis. He compared his speech to FDR's speech on the eve of World War II, and then he painted two enemies. He said our greatest enemies were Putin abroad and conservatives at home, essentially, and MAGA supporters. He hasn't used the term conservatives. He calls them MAGA extremists, domestic extremists. The reality is, and again, we're a nonpartisan group and we don't endorse anyone, but I'm going to say it anyway. For in the case of Joe Biden, he's arguably the greatest national security threat we've ever faced in our country, and I couldn't say that about Barack Obama. I couldn't say it about Bill Clinton. These were at the time they were president. They were mainly patriots. They were mainly at least in part they were realists. They weren't trying to start World War III, nuclear war, to destroy the American people. They weren't trying to use authoritarianism. Like Obama did to some extent, of course, with the Trump-Russia collusion thing, which he certainly was part of. But Biden is he's an authoritarian president. There's no argument around that. And I grew up in a time when I admired Democrats. I admired Democrats because they agreed with me on three critical issues. Number one, civil rights. They supported civil rights. They supported free speech, and they opposed unnecessary wars abroad. And on each of those issues, they flipped to the other side. And so I'm sad to say that there's essentially nothing that I can agree with or point to the Democrat Party today in terms of leadership. Obviously, RFK Jr. is, he's very commendable on a number of issues. Tulsi Gabbard, a former Democrat. But in general, the Democrat leadership today, they're against the American people on almost every issue. And again, I'm not endorsing Republicans. We don't endorse anyone as a task force.
No,
There needs to be a change in strategy.
Yeah, yeah. We're so, and just for your heads up, I didn't tell you beforehand, but the first half hour of our discussions on geopolitical issues will be put on YouTube. The other half this will be just for my Patreon followers. So, it'll be a much smaller group. But yeah, we don't. But that's been our struggle in even hardening the grid as a task force. I'm newer in that space. 4 or 5 years, 2 years at the EMP task force here now. But I mean, it's always everything's political, right? And it's hard to get away from that side of it. But I saw a compilation video of Joe Biden and his stances on policy. I mean, just 10 years ago. Some of them were even newer. Some of them were older, like 20 years ago. And just his political stances on things are like he's far further right than Trump on a lot of these issues, right? On stuff, on immigration, right? On border policy. Like he was hammering people on, illegal immigrants coming across the border. I saw like a video of him, just absolutely hammering it. And now we've got 8 million illegal immigrants. I had a chance to talk to a guy that just retired from the Border Patrol here recently. He was pretty high up, and he was stating definitively that the amount of Chinese nationals that have crept into this country, or that they're capturing at the border, is much higher than what's kind of being reported. Military age men. He was saying it's a lot of them are coming from Asian countries at this point. I think the number was, I forget the exact number, but the amount of special interest aliens, which are illegal immigrants that are coming from countries that don't really care for the United States that much, and it's not like entire families. It's just basically 20 to 40-year-old men that are showing up in groups. Man, it's really, really. I think that's another thing that people don't really talk about. We have the ability of directed energy weapons. You have the ability of using drones to attack. Like we saw 12 guys from Saudi Arabia in this country carry out the largest, well, technically, apparently January 6th is now the largest, but 9/11, we'll just call that the largest terrorist attack on American history. 12 guys carried that out. It took them a year or two to plan. But some of with technology where we're at today, who knows how many sleeper cells we have in this country and the amount and level of damage that they could carry out. So again, that was something else that people have been bringing up and asking me about, these special interest aliens and, possibly getting involved with delaying the election or causing problems. What are your thoughts on that? And again, this is off the record. So this is just for my Patreon viewers. We won't put this out on the Task Force YouTube channel.
Well, I mean, first of all, January 6th was anything but a terrorist attack. I mean, it was a protest that became a minor riot. No one was killed. I mean, at least they didn't kill anyone. We had, there were, one of the protesters was murdered in cold blood by one of the police officers who went rogue. shot a Air Force veteran in the neck mortally, sadly. And there were some deaths subsequent. But there was, this was not a violent insurrection. They didn't bring any guns into the Capitol. They didn't have a plan to take over the government. It was stupid. I was literally yelling at my TV when that happened. But to
Yeah,
your great,
I still have a video up. The night it was happening, I was like literally, I posted a video where I'm like, "What are you doing? You're
yeah,
literally playing into their hands. They say we're violent extremists, and you're giving them fodder." And I was absolutely right. It's an insurrection, even though there was no plan to like take the government, hold the government. It was a bunch of ticked off people. And then I watched. I could pull up dozens of videos. I mean, just I think a year ago the feminists took over the Supreme Court, right? And they're in there.
yeah,
They shut down the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court people had to flee to the back. And I mean, we can look at a lot of examples where they play this like it was a coup. I've even heard that term on the mainstream media. That it was a coup and an insurrection, the greatest. It's like, and they withheld half of the video footage from that. They
yeah.
looped the same videos, and I'm not advocating for the stuff that happened at the fence line and getting. I'm sitting here saying it was horrendous, but once the people were inside, they're being like led around. They're carrying flags. They're praying for the police officers. This idea that it was this crazy an insurrection. If it was an insurrection, it was the worst insurrection of all time.
Yeah, it was anything but an insurrection, and obviously Trump wasn't charged with insurrection. No one was charged with an insurrection. It can't be an insurrection if no one was charged with that crime. But with regards to your main point, which is 100,000, nearly 100,000 Chinese nationals of military age, 85% of military age have crossed into our border since October 2019. And that's enough to staff an entire PLA group army. So what we're seeing is a large number of likely PLA special forces and airborne troop brigades, and we have massive Chinese numbers of Chinese container ships that bring 99% of the containers they bring into the country are not inspected. They could contain nuclear missiles. They could contain caliber Club K nuclear supersonic cruise missiles, which could then be carried by diesel truck to anywhere in the country, and we could have a nuclear attack that emanated from our own territory that could destroy America without a single missile launch or even a super EMP attack from our enemies. So. And obviously there's a lot of other things they could do. They could use nuclear suitcase weapons. They could use biological weapons. There were biolabs that were discovered that were Chinese biolabs in California. And another source told me in Nevada as well. I haven't been able to verify that one. But minimally, they could get a bunch of AK-47s together, small arms, maybe rocket launchers. They could take out power stations. They could bring down our grid with kinetic attacks. Maybe conventional EMPs, suitcase EMPs, lower threat levels, but still do tremendous damage in the event that Biden defends Taiwan militarily. And, I'm a member of a group, and I won't say what the group is, but it's got specialists that, talk almost, every week they're talking about, okay, this is how we can defeat China in a war over Taiwan. And I just shake my head. I'm like, this is delusional. In the old days, maybe 25 years ago, we could face off China successfully because we had, 20 years ago, we had 7,000 strategic nukes. They had maybe 300, and now it's reversed. They have at least twice as many operationally deployed strategic nuclear weapons than we do, by my estimation. So,
I think when we war gamed the Taiwan Strait, when we war gamed, China taking Taiwan and us getting involved and basically trying to defend Taiwan, my understanding is that the military we lost bad every time.
Every classified war game over the past 2 decades, since about 2000, we've lost. There were these open source CSIS war games that basically said, okay, we're going to rig the game to ensure we can win by, the enemy can't use super EMP, can't use massive cyber, he can't use nuclear weapons in theater. And so, of course, the U.S. was victorious every time. But, that's when you rig the game. The classified war games don't rig the game because they're actually trying to make it as realistic as possible to give U.S. policymakers the information they need to know what the risks are. So that if they start a war with China over Taiwan or Russia over Ukraine, then they know that there's a very real chance that it will end in our nuclear incineration. So that's something we don't hear a lot. We have this liberal media, pro-war media, that's constantly saying, "Oh, we can win a war with Russia." I mean, we have Petraeus and other retired four-star generals that say, if we should start bombing Russian forces directly in Russian annexed areas of Ukraine, and that is a nuclear trigger. That's the real nuclear trigger. It's not so much U.S. forces. Well, I mean U.S. forces, but NATO forces crossing into Western Ukraine. It's really NATO attacks in Russian annexed territory. Any part of Russia. That's the trigger, the real nuclear trigger. But of course, we get cyber attacked and counter space attacked well before we got to that level. If we were to intervene directly in Ukraine.
Well, David, hey, is there anything else you wanted to throw out there? If not, I'll let you point people in the direction where they can find more information about you and your newsletter and sign up for your newsletter, which I highly recommend everybody do. But if you have something else that we missed or that I didn't bring up, feel free to chat about it. But if not, then sign us out, brother.
Well, you mentioned before the interview you wanted to get into more, of my estimation of the Russian nukes in space that came out.
Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah. So we had the story that came out here. Again, I didn't reply to my followers first day or second day. I waited like 2 weeks because the story kept changing every day, and then the third day it was this, the fourth day it was that. It's just you just don't know what to believe, and you all obviously have sources better than my sources. So what is your, since we've had a couple weeks to look back at this, as a task force, I know we had some meetings, we were discussing different types of kinetic warfare in space and the different technologies that exist and how it wasn't really likely that this satellite fit those parameters. And we had some of these discussions. So now that we've had time to reflect back, where's your stance on this whole Russian space nuke satellite?
Yeah, so this started a few weeks ago, maybe even a month ago. Was House Intel Committee Chairman Mike Turner, said that he essentially leaked some intelligence that he discovered in the previous month or two that there was a classified assessment that Russia had a kind of a game-changing weapon in space, and he didn't really reveal the details, but they, as you said, they began leaking out over time. And he said he was very alarmed by it. He said that the Biden administration wasn't doing enough to counter it. And essentially, the details we found out was that it was a nuclear weapon in space. Initially, it was said that it might be deployed or it might be on the verge of being deployed. And then by Friday night, CNN reported this was so it happened on a Wednesday, and then 2 days later. I published an article the very next day that was a comprehensive article on what it could be, summarizing based on the details. It could be a Russian X-ray laser of the type that we did under Project Excalibur that was canceled, I think, in '88 under the SDI program, which was essentially a nuclear weapon that could be detonated and could use X-ray lasers, power X-ray lasers, to take out multiple incoming ballistic missiles or satellites at the same time. And but then with the CNN article, it turned out to be a super EMP weapon because they talked about EMP blast waves, essentially, or EMP waves being used to take out enemy satellites. But as I exposed on the interview that you referenced, which was on the Rob Maness show a couple weeks ago, there's really no reason that Russia would need to have a super EMP weapon to take out enemy satellites. It's kind of like using a hammer to kill a gnat, essentially, because they can already take out our satellites using purely cyber attacks, as well as some kinetic ASAT weapons. And that was exposed in the Senate Armed Services Committee hearings with STRATCOM, U.S. STRATCOM commanders in March of 2023, in which multiple senators stated that they could take it down all our early warning and GPS satellites within 2 hours of a war beginning. So, the obvious, and super EMP satellites in low Earth orbit are optimally positioned. Particularly if they're at 280 miles altitude over the U.S., as in the case of North Korean and Iranian satellites, to take out the continental U.S. Turn the lights out, take out our electrical power grid, our critical infrastructure, essentially even be used as a counterforce strike to take out half of the nuclear deterrent if they're not sufficiently shielded against super EMP effects. Of course, our nuclear triad and our NC2 system are shielded against what I call conventional nuclear EMP effects, which are Cold War levels. But we know that super EMP provides kind of voltage per meter at 2 to 4 times of what regular nuclear weapons can do. And so, there's a very real concern that Air Force One and Two could be shot out of the air, or Tacoma aircraft could be taken out, or that could essentially disable our ICBMs that after they've been launched. Our nuclear missile submarines, 10 of which out of 14 are in port at any given time, could be taken out, disabled. And then, of course, our nuclear bombers that are not even on alert, at our 3 nuclear bomber bases throughout the U.S., as well as our launch control stations. We have at least 4 nuclear launch control stations that Dr. Peter Pry identified as likely targets. Might have a few more as well. So all of those could potentially be taken out in a super EMP detonation from North Korea, Iran, Russia, or China. And I assess that all 4 countries either currently have super EMP weapons in space over the U.S., or could launch them on a moment's notice. I mean, super EMP technology, the CNN article and other liberal media articles talked about, this, U.S. intelligence is saying it's probably 2 years away. Well, I talked to a former CIA officer. He's very advanced in age, but he's a very experienced CIA officer, and he told me that the articles were written as if they were, disinformation spins by the CIA. He could tell, like he knew the ways the CIA works to spin a story. Basically, I can't remember the term he used because it didn't really register very well. But essentially, it's a controlled leak. So they leak the intelligence when they know intelligence is likely to be leaked. They leak intelligence to kind of spin the story. And in this case, they spin the story to make it seem less threatening and alarming for the American people. And I understand why Biden would want to do that. He doesn't want to expose the fact that we're that, horrifically exposed to destruction in an instant by our enemies, because most likely that would cause support for the war in Ukraine, for example, to collapse. Because
in fairness, the last 5 administrations have done the same thing. They've minimized the threat. They've always put, they haven't addressed it. They pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, I would argue that Trump was a notable exception.
Well, okay, so yes, he did put the executive order out there, but at the same time, I mean, we're talking about we've done the studies, we've done the numbers. We're talking about 90% of the American population dying within the first year after an EMP attack. So while Trump was one of the few that addressed it and put a couple things together to get it started, it wasn't one of his. He mentioned it, but I'm just saying it wasn't one of his big policy things, right? And we're in a spot now where we're running out of time. World War III could kick off at any point in time. We do know from foreign writings that first strike doctrine is cyber, combined arms warfare, cyber EMP. We are not hardened at all. There is no backup plan. There's no plan at FEMA. There's the United States military. I was part of the wargaming operation there, the Electromagnetic Defense Task Force. There is no plan for the military to feed their troops. They're not going to have power just like the regular people. As far as I know, there's no COG. There's no continuity of government. I'm talking about 500 congressmen and senators, and it's just we're basically sticking our head in the sand and just crossing our fingers and pretending this isn't going to happen. And
Right.
that's kind of what I was alluding to, is the fact that they don't allow this message to get out. And when they need something written to kind of pull back from it, because again, you don't want to frighten the American people. The American people you don't want them finding out that it's been 20 years that we've had organizations warning Congress, warning them since 2004, the original Congressional EMP Commission. 90% of Americans are going to die if you don't fix this. And we're now sitting here 20 years later. We're having the same conversations in front of the hearings. I'm watching the same, literally the exact same responses from NERC and FERC, North American Energy Reliability Corporation, and the Federal Energy Reliability Committee. Did I get that right? FERC?
I think
Anyways,
so.
NERC and FERC.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are two organizations that kind of
Commission.
overlook it.
It's not a committee. It's a commission.
Commission. Thank you. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
But I watched their C-SPAN, and they literally pay lip service to the congressman, the panel, whether it's the intelligence panel or the cyber panel or the military panels. They give the same answers. Yes, sir, we're really concerned about these Chinese transformers. We're looking into it. They've been giving the same answers for 2 years. Yes, sir, we're very, we are entering a solar maximum with solar flares, and we're concerned about this. We're looking into this. We're looking into that. I actually saw Josh Hawley at the probably 3 or 4 months ago. He stood up and said, "You've been talking about this study. He's like, I want a date. When are we going to get this report on these Chinese infrastructure in our critical infrastructure in our electric grid?" He goes, I want a date. The guy just wouldn't answer. And I guarantee the next time that guy's in front of that same committee, he's going to give the same answer. I promise, because we've been seeing this for 20 years. And I'm just at a point where I don't know what it's going to take to get them to take this serious. But we're if we're not out of time already, we're running out of time, and there's no plan to deal with the aftermath of this. So what is your take on step forward? Hoping that not hoping politically that Trump gets in there. I'm saying as a matter of fact that he's a friend of the hardening the grid and moving forward. My stance is that we're going to need like a Manhattan Project. We're going to need a cabinet level position like a EMP czar to with the authority, the financial ability, and the legislative authority to actually get stuff done and get it done quickly, really fast. Because if we don't, as a nation, we're done for. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm actually very hopeful. It was recently leaked that Trump's number one Department of Homeland Security Secretary's pick is Vivek Ramaswamy, who I worked for in his presidential campaign. It's his defense and foreign policy advisor. So Vivek, I fully briefed on the EMP issue and spun him up to speed in terms of the devastation it would cause. And so he would be ideally placed to be a cabinet level EMP czar, because currently, the EMP mission is assigned to the Department of Homeland Security, and it's very sad to say that the organization that's charged with taking action on the EMP defense front, is CISA, and CISA is singularly committed to the cyber defense mission. Like I just recently attended an event where the regional cyber, the CISA director representative for the entire region, not just Utah but multiple states, he spoke, and he only addressed the cyber threat. And I was actually going to be speaking on the panel, but when they figured out I was more of an EMP than a cyber expert, they decided to uninvite me as a panelist speaker. So, and the organizer said, we'll follow up with an EMP threat, kind of event later, and I don't think it's going to happen. I'd love to see it happen, but I doubt. I think that was just him trying to justify his decision, but. I think a Trump administration really would see some major action on the EMP defense side. But the problem is, from a purely defensive, when we talk about defensive measures, military measures, it's way too late for that. Like you said, we are likely months away from a World War III event. Now, whether we actually cross the line into World War III is unclear, but whether it's a Chinese blockade and invasion of Taiwan that's likely to materialize at the end of the year, or an early fall, or Russian massive offensive in Ukraine that essentially succeeds in annexing all Ukrainian territory up the Dnipro River line and provokes a NATO military response. Either one of those could send us into a cyber EMP or nuclear war at a moment's notice, and there's simply not enough time. Like I've with my our last book, Catastrophe Now, that the task force published under Dr. Pry's name, had recommendations of things we could do to strengthen our nuclear triad within just a matter of weeks, as well as a period of 2 to 4 years in terms of doubling the size of our nuclear arsenal, or actually increasing it by 2.4 times. But aside from that, there's just nothing we can do, I think, to secure the American people short of diplomatic options. And that's why I focus so much in my real war articles on the diplomatic solutions, because, and Dr. Pry was of the same mind before he passed, that we had to have peace with Russia. He gave, he wrote an article about make peace, not war with Russia. It was, I don't know, maybe in the March time frame, March 2022 time frame or thereabouts. And he was very articulate. And we actually devised this strategy together in late 2021. And he assigned me a kind of a special mission to try to get publish a bunch of articles to divide the Sino-Russian alliance at the same time as providing solutions for avoiding war with Russia and China. Because the sad truth is, if we fight either one in war, it will likely end up fighting the other at the same time. And I was starting to doubt that with regards to Russia, because I don't think they want war with us. China, I think they're ready. They're ready and willing to go to war with us, and they're expecting war. They don't. It's not their top. It's not their preferred outcome, but they believe that Biden will make good on his pledges to defend Taiwan militarily, and so they've mobilized an army of perhaps 3 million men, which could be used to invade and occupy the Western U.S. after an EMP strike. So that's really the outcome I'm hoping to avoid. I think all of us are hoping or trying to avoid, and committing our lives to try to prevent as EMP task force leaders.
Yep. Hey, it's not all bad news. I mean, well, it kind of is all bad news, but we're hopeful for the future. We're as a committee, as a task force, we're always committed to trying to step in and educate the utilities, educate the congressmen and congresswomen on the threats that face this country. It is a tough sell at this point. It's hard for us to get our foot in the door at this point. The electric utilities they spend so much money in lobbying and on both sides of the aisles. It's just tough to get our foot in the door. We're kind of hanging our hat, hoping that a certain person gets elected and that we can get our foot in the door with him again and try and get somebody to take this threat seriously, somebody to see the threat for what it is, right? So we're going to keep fighting, and everybody there at home, keep praying that nothing happens in the near term. So with that said, Dave, why don't you close this out, and again, tell us where people can find you, more information about you, and sign up for your newsletter.
Yeah, I'd like to encourage all our viewers to go to the, first of all, dpyne.substack.com. Once again, dpyne.substack.com. It's my Real War newsletter. Got both free and paid subscription options. The vast majority of my articles are free, but I've got some paid as well if you want to get the extra intel. And then, of course, the EMP Task Force website at emptaskforce.us. That is where we encourage you to go to, volunteer your time and money to help the cause. We are a nonprofit. We are a congressionally authorized board, but we're a nonprofit organization. So we rely on donations to fund our efforts. So, thanks again for the opportunity to be on your show.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I have no doubt in my mind we'll probably be talking soon, because things seem to be developing almost every week. Something else comes out, and you're just like, "What is going on now?" So we'll have you back here soon. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks again.